He pulled over his luxury car to the side of the road, frustrated and impatient. A humble young waitress approached to help, but as she bent down to check the engine, her eyes caught something that made her heart race. The pendant she wore around her neck was identical to the one his late wife wore every day. He froze, and the truth behind that pendant would change both of their lives forever. The scorching New Mexico sun beat down mercilessly on the sleek black Maserati pulled over on the shoulder of Santa Rosa's rural highway. Scott Caldwell slammed his palm against the steering wheel, his Italian suit now a $3,000 straitjacket in the desert heat. "Damn it," he growled, loosening his silk tie. Of all days for his car to break down. The one time he'd dismissed his driver to be alone with his thoughts. The business deal had slipped through his fingers that morning. 2 years of negotiations gone in a heartbeat, because someone else had swooped in with a better offer. Scott Caldwell wasn't used to losing. At 45, he'd rebuilt his empire from ashes, transforming a failing company into a billion-dollar corporation through sheer determination and ruthless business tactics. But today, he'd lost, and the bitter taste of failure lingered. He reached for his phone, only to find it dead. Perfect. Just perfect. In the distance, a weather-beaten sign for La Mariposa Diner swayed in the hot breeze. Scott squinted through the windshield, calculating his options. The nearest town was miles away, and sitting in a stalled car under the merciless sun wasn't one of them. As beads of sweat rolled down his temples, a beat-up blue pickup truck slowed beside his Maserati. Scott tensed, his Manhattan instincts kicking in, but relaxed slightly when a young woman hopped out. "Need some help," she called, approaching with a confident stride that belied her simple appearance. She couldn't have been more than 23, with sun-kissed skin and hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her faded jeans and checkered shirt with a La Mariposa name tag pinned to the pocket told him everything he needed to know. "Unless you're hiding a mechanic under that shirt, I doubt it," Scott replied, immediately regretting his sharp tone. The young woman merely raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Well, I grew up fixing my godfather's tractor, so that's about as close as you'll get for 20 miles. She extended her hand. "I'm Chloe." Scott hesitated before shaking it. Her grip was firm, calloused from work. "Scott Caldwell." "The car just stopped," she asked, already moving toward the hood. "Mind popping it open?" Something about her straightforward manner cut through his irritation. He reached for the latch, and the hood rose with a soft click. "Let's see what we've got here," Chloe murmured, leaning over the engine with surprising confidence. As she bent forward, something slipped from beneath her shirt, a silver pendant that caught the sunlight, swinging hypnotically from a delicate chain. Scott's world stopped. The pendant was shaped like a butterfly, its wings intricately detailed with tiny engravings along the edges. A butterfly pendant exactly like the one he had given Rebecca on their wedding day, 23 years ago. The same pendant that had disappeared along with her body after the plane crash. His throat constricted. Where did you get that?" His voice emerged as a hoarse whisper. Chloe glanced up, confused, then followed his gaze to the necklace. Her hand instinctively closed around it. "This," a shadow crossed her face. "It's the only thing I have from my birth mother. The woman who left me at the orphanage gave it to me." Scott's ears rang as memories crashed over him like tidal waves. 23 years earlier, the private airstrip. Rebecca's smile as she boarded the plane, her hand resting protectively over her barely visible pregnancy. "I'll call when we land," she had promised, the butterfly pendant glinting at her throat. His wedding gift to her, custom-made with their initials engraved on the inside. Then the devastating call hours later. The plane had gone down over the Pacific. The wreckage found. No survivors. Scott stumbled back against the car, legs suddenly weak. "Hey, are you okay?" Chloe's voice sounded far away. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "A ghost?" "Yes, that's exactly what this is. Some cruel cosmic joke." "I'm fine," he managed. "Just the heat." "Well, I think I found your problem. Loose connection in your fuel line. Simple fix." She wiped her hands on a rag from her back pocket. "I can have you running in 10 minutes if you've got some water I can use." Scott nodded mechanically, retrieving a bottle from the car. As she worked, He couldn't tear his eyes from the pendant that occasionally peeked out from her shirt. It couldn't be the same one. It had to be a coincidence, a similar design. But Rebecca's pendant had been one of a kind, designed by a jeweler who had since passed away. "The butterfly," he said suddenly. "Does it open?" Chloe paused, giving him a curious look. "Yeah, actually, how'd you know that?" She pulled the necklace out, revealing the butterfly in full. "It's empty inside. Though, I always wondered if it was supposed to hold something." Scott's heart hammered against his ribs. Rebecca's pendant had a hidden compartment where he'd placed a tiny photo of them on their honeymoon. "May I?" His hand trembled as he reached for it. Hesitating briefly, Chloe slipped the chain over her head and handed it to him. "It's the only valuable thing I own, so please be careful." The weight of the silver in his palm felt achingly familiar. He turned it over, and there it was, the nearly imperceptible seam where the butterfly opened. And on the back, though partially worn away by years of handling, the tiny engraved initials, Ahrens, Rebecca, and Scott. The world tilted beneath his feet. "Where did you say you got this?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I was left at New Hope Orphanage in Albuquerque as a baby," Chloe explained, taking the pendant back gently. "Sister Mary told me the woman who brought me in gave them this to keep for me. Said it was my connection to my past." She smiled sadly. "Pretty dramatic, right? But it's all I've got. 23 years, the timing matched perfectly, but it was impossible. Rebecca had died in that crash. They'd found wreckage. Curtis had identified her personal effects. Curtis, his business partner and best friend. The man who had helped him rebuild his life after losing everything. "Got it," Chloe announced, closing the hood. "Try starting it now." The Maserati's engine purred to life, but Scott barely noticed. His mind was racing through impossibilities and terrible suspicions. "You saved me a long walk in this heat," he said, reaching for his wallet. "Let me compensate you for your trouble." Chloe waved him off. "No need. Just helping out a stranded traveler." She glanced at her watch. "But I've got to get back to work. My shift starts in 10 minutes, and my grandmother needs her medication tonight." "Your grandmother?" "Well, not by blood. Betty took me in when I was 14 and the foster system wasn't working out. She's the closest thing to family I've got." Scott reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "If you ever need anything, a job, a reference," he paused, "or if you ever want to know more about that pendant." Chloe took the card, eyebrows rising as she read it. "Caldwell Industries. You're that Scott Caldwell." She studied his face. "What would a CEO know about my necklace?" "Perhaps nothing," Scott said carefully. "But I've seen one very similar. It's a remarkable coincidence." As Chloe climbed back into her pickup, Scott knew with bone-deep certainty that this was no coincidence at all. The butterfly pendant, the timing, the orphanage. He watched her drive away, his mind already formulating a plan. After 23 years of believing his family was dead, Scott Caldwell had just found a ghost, and possibly much more. The road to Santa Rosa stretched before him, and for the first time in decades, so did hope. Scott's private jet cut through the clouds as Manhattan's skyline emerged on the horizon. He barely noticed the view he normally savored. His mind was elsewhere, fixated on a silver butterfly pendant and the young woman who wore it. "Mr. Caldwell, we're beginning our descent." He nodded absently to the flight attendant. The 48 hours since his encounter in Santa Rosa had been a blur of sleepless nights and questions that gnawed at his sanity. Was it truly possible? Could Chloe be his daughter? Could Rebecca have somehow survived? His phone buzzed with a text from Curtis Vaughn. "Board meeting moved up. Need you here ASAP." Curtis, his oldest friend, the man who had stood by him through the darkest period of his life, who had helped him rebuild Caldwell Industries from the ashes of near bankruptcy after the accident, the man who had identified Rebecca's personal effects, the same man who now occupied a corner office in Scott's building and controlled 30% of his company's shares. As the plane touched down, Scott made a decision. He would tell no one about the pendant, especially not Curtis. Not until he knew more. The sleek elevator ascended to the top floor of Caldwell Tower. Scott's reflection distorted in its polished steel walls. He straightened his tie, schooling his features into the mask of cool authority his employees expected. The butterfly pendant and its implications would have to wait, for now. There he is, Curtis's booming voice carried across the conference room as Scott entered. The man himself. Curtis Vaughn approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention. At 47, he remained fit, his salt and pepper hair lending him the distinguished air he cultivated so carefully. His smile was broad, but something in his eyes had always remained calculating, even at their friendliest moments. Curtis, Scott accepted the offered handshake. What couldn't wait until Thursday? Japanese investors. Curtis lowered his voice. They're getting cold feet after the Hamilton deal fell through. Thought we should address it head on. The meeting dragged on for 3 hours. Throughout, Scott found himself studying Curtis with new eyes, searching for, what? Guilt? Deception? Some sign that would confirm the growing suspicion in his gut. "You're distracted today," Curtis commented later as they stood alone in Scott's office overlooking the city. Still upset about Hamilton, Scott swirled the scotch in his glass. "Just thinking about the past. Dangerous territory." Curtis leaned against the window. "What brought this on?" For a split second, Scott considered telling him about the pendant, watching his reaction. Instead, he said, "Anniversary's coming up." Curtis's expression softened with practiced sympathy. "Rebecca," he placed a hand on Scott's shoulder. 23 years next month. I still remember that day like it was yesterday." "I bet you do," Scott thought, but merely nodded. "You know what you need," Curtis continued. "That lake house weekend we've been postponing. Clear your head." "Maybe." Scott set down his glass. "First, I need to review those old accident reports." Something flickered in Curtis's eyes. So briefly, Scott almost missed it. "The investigation closed decades ago, Scott. What could you possibly find now? Closure, perhaps?" Scott's voice was carefully neutral. "Certain anniversaries make you want to tie up loose ends." Curtis checked his watch. "Well, while you're dwelling on ghosts, I'll be meeting with the Tokyo team. Some of us have to keep this company running." His laugh was meant to lighten the mood, but fell flat. After Curtis left, Scott unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk where he kept his most private possessions. The accident file was thick with reports, newspaper clippings, and photographs. He'd memorized every page years ago, but now he searched with new eyes. The official report stated that Rebecca's private jet had experienced catastrophic mechanical failure over the Pacific. Wreckage was recovered. Along with some personal effects, no bodies were ever found. Not unusual given the circumstances, they'd told him. Scott stared at the inventory of recovered items. Rebecca's wedding ring, a monogrammed handkerchief, various pieces of luggage. No butterfly pendant. His phone rang. His private investigator had already found something. Across town, in a modest apartment filled with the aroma of homemade soup, Chloe set an extra place at the kitchen table. "Betty, did you take your pills?" she called toward the bedroom. "Don't fuss," came the reply. As an elderly woman emerged leaning on a wooden cane, Betty Richardson's 80 years showed in the deep lines of her face, but her eyes remained sharp beneath silver hair. "I was organizing my recipes, not dying," Chloe smiled affectionately. "The blue ones are for morning, remember? I found them untouched." Betty waved dismissively. "When you get to my age, a few pills here or there won't make much difference." "They will to me," Chloe said firmly, ladling soup into worn ceramic bowls. "I need you around." Betty studied her with a knowing look. "Something happened today. You've got that face." Chloe hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out Scott's business card. "I met someone while helping a stranded driver." Betty took the card, her hand trembling slightly as she read the name. Her face paled. "He seemed interested in my pendant," Chloe continued, not noticing Betty's reaction. "Said he'd seen one like it before. Acted strange when he saw it." Betty set the card down carefully. "What exactly did you tell him? About yourself?" "Not much. Just about the orphanage and you." Chloe frowned. "Why?" Betty returned to her soup, avoiding Chloe's eyes. "Rich men often have ulterior motives when they take interest in young women." "It wasn't like that," Chloe protested. "He was, I don't know, shocked, like he'd seen something impossible." Betty's spoon clinked against her bowl. "Perhaps you should forget about him. Some mysteries are better left unsolved." Later that night, after Chloe had fallen asleep, Betty retrieved an old shoebox from beneath her bed. Inside lay newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. The headline of one read, Caldwell Industries CEO loses wife in tragic plane crash. The accompanying photo showed a younger Scott Caldwell with a beautiful dark-haired woman. Around her neck was a silver butterfly pendant identical to Chloe's. Betty's hands shook as she tucked the clipping away. She'd kept her secret for 23 years. She'd recognized the pendant the moment Sister Mary had shown her the abandoned baby, having worked as a housekeeper for the Caldwells before their marriage. She'd chosen silence then, believing it safer for the child. But now Scott Caldwell had found Chloe anyway. Betty reached for her phone, then hesitated. Would a warning call make things better? Or worse, 200 miles away in a private clinic nestled in the mountains of Flagstaff, Arizona, a nurse checked the vital signs of a female patient. The woman lay motionless, her once beautiful face now gaunt, her dark hair streaked with gray. Various machines monitored her condition, a steady drip of medication flowing through an IV into her arm. The nurse made notes in her chart. Patient RC, day 8395, no change. As she turned to leave, she failed to notice the patient's finger twitch slightly, or the single tear that slid from beneath her closed eyelid. On the bedside table, a framed photo showed the patient in happier times. Standing beside Scott Caldwell on their wedding day, a silver butterfly pendant gleaming at her throat, in elegant script. The frame was engraved with 2 words, "Forever mine. New Hope Orphanage closed 7 years ago," Daniel Reeves said, sliding a manila folder across Scott's desk. The private investigator had the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's darker side. Records were transferred to state archives. I called in a few favors. Scott opened the folder, revealing photocopied documents and grainy photographs. And Chloe Martinez, left at the orphanage on November 12, 2002, approximately 6 months old according to the examining physician. Reeves tapped a particular document. Note the date. Scott's throat tightened. Rebecca's plane had gone down in May 2002. The timing matched. The woman who dropped her off didn't leave a name. Reeves continued. Paid cash for a year of care and disappeared. Sister Mary Clarence was the only one who spoke with her. But she passed away in 2018. Scott studied the intake form, PAIC. Under distinguishing features was written, "Silver butterfly pendant, to remain with child." A crude drawing of the pendant accompanied the note. "What about birth records?" Scott asked. "That's where it gets interesting." Reeves leaned forward. "There aren't any. No birth certificate. No hospital records. Nothing before she appeared at New Hope. As if she didn't exist until that day." Exactly. She bounced around the foster system until age 14, when Elizabeth Richardson became her guardian. Reeves shuffled through more papers. Betty Richardson, 79, former domestic worker. No children of her own. Clean record, lives on Social Security and a modest pension. Scott stared at the faded photo of young Chloe clutching a teddy bear, the pendant visible around her neck. Something about her eyes. "I want a DNA test," he said quietly. Reeves nodded. "Figured as much. I'll need something with her DNA. Hair. Drinking glass? And I know a lab that can rush it, no questions asked. Do it discreetly. If anyone asks, this is about a scholarship opportunity through the Caldwell Foundation." After Reeves left, Scott unlocked a small safe hidden behind a painting in his office. Inside lay a velvet box he hadn't opened in years. The diamond ring had been recovered from the crash site, Rebecca's wedding ring. He'd never believed she would have removed it voluntarily. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Vaughn is here to see you." Scott quickly locked the safe and returned the painting to its place. "Send him in." Curtis strode in with a concerned expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You missed the conference call with Sydney. That's not like you." "Personal matter," Scott replied vaguely. Curtis settled into a chair. "Anything I can help with?" "Nothing important." Scott shuffled papers on his desk. "How did the call go?" "We salvaged it, but that's not why I'm here." Curtis studied him. "You've been distracted since you got back from New Mexico. What's going on, Scott?" For a moment, Scott considered confronting him directly. "Do you know anything about a baby with a butterfly pendant? Did you lie about identifying Rebecca's body?" Instead, he said, "I'm considering a new charitable initiative. Helping orphaned children." Something flashed in Curtis's eyes. "Noble cause. Why the sudden interest?" "Met a young woman in New Mexico. Former orphan. got me thinking about how different her life might have been with the right opportunities. Curtis's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Always the soft touch beneath that ruthless exterior. What orphanage? New Hope in Albuquerque. Scott watched carefully for any reaction. Curtis checked his watch. Can't say I'm familiar with it. Listen, I'm heading to Chicago tomorrow. The Wilson merger needs a personal touch. You sure you're okay? You seem fixated on something. I'm fine. Just tired. After Curtis left, Scott opened his laptop and accessed the company's financial records. He'd built the empire, but in the months after the accident, grief had consumed him. Curtis had stepped in, handling day-to-day operations while Scott recovered. Scott never questioned the financial maneuvering that saved the company from bankruptcy. Curtis had explained it as necessary restructuring and liquidation of underperforming assets. Scott had been too broken to care about the details. Now he looked with new eyes, searching for patterns, discrepancies, anything that might connect to his growing suspicions. The Arizona sun was setting over the mountains as Dr. James Hoffman reviewed patient files in his private clinic. His phone rang, displaying a number he'd hoped never to see again. "It's been years," he answered tersely. "Our arrangement was no contact unless absolutely necessary." "It is necessary," Curtis Vaughn replied. "Scott Caldwell is asking questions about a young woman with a particular piece of jewelry." Hoffman froze. "How much does he know?" "Not enough yet, but he's looking into an orphanage in Albuquerque." "That's impossible." The trail was completely obfuscated. "Apparently not completely enough," Curtis snapped. "Double her medication. We can't risk any more awareness episodes." Hoffman lowered his voice. "She's already at maximum safe dosage. Any more could cause permanent damage or cardiac failure. Then get creative, doctor. Remember, if she wakes up, we all go down, including your son." The call ended. Hoffman slumped in his chair, glancing toward the hallway that led to the isolated wing where their special patient had lain unconscious for decades. The woman whose existence funded this entire facility through Vaughn's generous donations, what had begun as a simple offer, hide a woman everyone believed was dead, keep her in a controlled coma, had evolved into the most elaborate conspiracy of his career, a conspiracy that had bought his son's education, this clinic, his reputation, a conspiracy that could destroy everything if Scott Caldwell ever learned the truth. "You look beautiful," Betty said, as Chloe twirled in a borrowed dress. "Your first real date. Your mother would be proud." Chloe stopped mid-twirl. "You never talk about my mother." Betty's hand stilled in the middle of adjusting Chloe's necklace. "I didn't know her, dear. I only meant—" "I know." Chloe squeezed the older woman's hand. "I just wonder sometimes. Was she kind? Did she like music? Do I have her eyes?" She fingered the butterfly pendant. "Why this necklace was so important that she made sure I kept it, even when she gave me away." Betty turned away, busying herself with tidying Chloe's small bedroom. "I'm sure she had her reasons. Maybe someday you'll understand them." The doorbell rang, ending the conversation. Chloe hurried to answer it, revealing a handsome man in his 30s wearing an expensive suit that seemed at odds with their modest apartment complex. "Logan Caldwell," he introduced himself with a warm smile. "It's a pleasure to see you again, Chloe." Betty emerged from the bedroom, freezing when she heard the name. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Mrs. Richardson." Logan extended his hand. "I hope you don't mind me taking Chloe to dinner in Santa Fe." Betty regained her composure. "Caldwell? Any relation to Scott Caldwell?" Logan nodded. "My cousin, do you know him?" "Only by reputation," Betty replied carefully. "His company is quite famous." As the young couple left, Betty sank into her recliner, heart pounding. First Scott appearing in Chloe's life, now his cousin taking a romantic interest. After 23 years of careful anonymity, the Caldwell family was suddenly everywhere. It couldn't be coincidence. Betty pulled out a worn address book and dialed a number she hadn't used in decades. "It's Elizabeth Richardson," she said, when a surprised voice answered. "Yes, that Elizabeth. I worked in the Caldwell household before." She lowered her voice. "We need to talk about the baby that disappeared." In her handbag lay a newspaper clipping she'd never shown Chloe, the society page from 24 years ago. Caldwell Industries heir marries Rebecca Cole in lavish ceremony. The bride wore a silver butterfly pendant that matched Chloe's exactly. Betty had recognized it immediately when Sister Mary showed her the abandoned infant. She'd made her decision then, to protect the child from whatever dark circumstances had separated her from her parents. Now she wondered if she'd made the right choice. "These transfers go back 23 years, Scott muttered, scrolling through financial records on his computer, every quarter since the plane crash. Substantial sums had moved from a Caldwell subsidiary through 3 shell companies before landing at something called Monarch Medical Facilities in Flagstaff, Arizona. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. The timing too perfect. The first transfer occurred exactly 1 month after Rebecca's death. Scott's phone buzzed with a text from Reeves. "Following paper trail to Arizona clinic will report soon." A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. His assistant poked her head in. "Mr. Caldwell, your cousin is here." Logan Caldwell entered with his characteristic easy confidence. 5 years younger than Scott, he'd always been the family's black sheep. Brilliant but restless. More interested in adventure than business. "Don't look so surprised." Logan grinned. "I do occasionally visit civilization." Scott rose to embrace him. "Last I heard, you were photographing polar bears." "That was last year. Just got back from documenting water scarcity in North Africa." Logan dropped into a chair. "But that's not why I'm here. I met someone." Scott raised an eyebrow. Logan's romantic entanglements were typically as fleeting as his geographic locations. "Her name's Chloe, works at a diner in Santa Rosa." Logan's expression softened. "She's different, Scott. Authentic in a way people in our circle rarely are." Scott carefully controlled his reaction. "Chloe Martinez, the mechanic. You know her. She helped when my car broke down, quite resourceful." Logan leaned forward. "It's more than that. She's smart, compassionate, been through hell but still sees the good in everything." He hesitated. "I'm taking her to the Montoya Charity Gala next week." Scott's mind raced. His own daughter, if DNA confirmed his suspicions, dating his cousin. The complications were dizzying. "Isn't that a bit rushed?" he managed. Logan shrugged. "When you know, you know. And what exactly are your intentions with this waitress?" Scott's tone came out sharper than intended. "That's unlike you, cousin." Logan frowned. "Since when do you care about social status? Your own wife wasn't exactly born with a silver spoon." Scott backpedaled. "I'm just concerned. You've known her what, a week?" "Sometimes a week is enough." Logan studied him. "Why the interrogation? You've never cared about my love life before." "Just looking out for you." Scott replied smoothly. "Bring her by the office sometime. I'd like to get to know her better." After Logan left, Scott called Reeves. "I need that DNA test expedited, and I need everything on Monarch Medical Facilities tomorrow." Curtis Vaughn's private jet touched down in Flagstaff as sunset painted the mountains gold. A black SUV waited on the tarmac. "Any change?" he asked the driver. "Dr. Hoffman is waiting to brief you personally." The Northern Arizona Medical Research Center sat isolated among pine trees, its modern architecture belying its secretive purpose. Few knew that behind its legitimate research facade operated a private facility for wealthy patients requiring absolute discretion, or for those who needed to disappear completely. Curtis found Dr. Hoffman in his office, anxiety evident in the physician's hunched shoulders. "You shouldn't have come," Hoffman said without preamble. "Too risky with Caldwell asking questions." "That's precisely why I came." Curtis closed the door. "Show me." Hoffman led him through keycard-protected doors to an isolated wing. In a private room, machines monitored a female patient, though aged by decades of unconsciousness. Rebecca Cole Caldwell remained recognizable. "The latest scans show increased brain activity," Hoffman explained. "She's fighting the medication." Curtis studied the unconscious woman. 23 years ago, she'd been vibrant, beautiful. The only woman Scott Caldwell had ever truly loved. The woman Curtis himself had desired since university. "You said the damage from the crash would keep her permanently unconscious," Curtis said accusingly. "That was the initial prognosis. But the brain has remarkable neuroplasticity. We've been chemically suppressing her consciousness for decades." Curtis touched the chain around Rebecca's neck. Broken. Missing its butterfly pendant. "If she wakes and remembers..." "She won't," Hoffman assured him. "Even if she regains consciousness. The brain damage and drug regimen should ensure complete amnesia." "Should. I didn't build all this on should, Doctor." Curtis glared. "Scott Caldwell is investigating an orphanage in Albuquerque. The same orphanage where you arranged for the baby to be taken. Hoffman paled. That's impossible. No records connected them. Apparently something did. Curtis paced the room. Double her medication, whatever the risk, and prepare for transfer to the overseas facility if necessary. Moving her in this condition could kill her. Then pray it doesn't come to that. Curtis checked his watch. I need to return before Scott suspects anything. Keep her under control. As he turned to leave, he failed to notice the slight movement of Rebecca's finger, or the single tear sliding down her cheek. The upscale Santa Fe restaurant glittered with candlelight as Logan watched Chloe examine the menu with barely concealed alarm. The prices aren't listed, she whispered. Logan smiled. That's because I'm paying. Order anything you want. Chloe fidgeted with her pendant. I've never been anywhere this fancy. You belong here as much as anyone, Logan assured her, reaching for her hand. That pendant? You never take it off. Chloe's fingers instinctively closed around the silver butterfly. It's my only connection to my birth mother. Sounds silly, but I feel like she's watching over me when I wear it. Not silly at all. Logan's eyes softened. Family connections matter, even the ones we can't see. Speaking of family, Chloe said, your cousin seemed very interested in my necklace when we met. Logan frowned. Scott, that's odd. He's never been one for jewelry. He recognized it somehow. Said he'd seen one similar. Something in Logan's expression changed. My aunt, Scott's mother, used to collect butterfly brooches. Maybe it reminded him of her. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Logan filed away this curious detail. Scott's interest in Chloe suddenly seemed less about concern for his cousin's romantic choices and more about something else entirely. In Brian Hoffman's apartment overlooking Flagstaff, case files spread across his desk. His Interpol credentials lay beside photographs of Curtis Vaughn meeting with known cartel affiliates. For 3 years, Brian had investigated money laundering through seemingly legitimate medical facilities. The trail had led unexpectedly to his father's clinic and its mysterious benefactor, Curtis Vaughn. His phone rang. A secure line. Hoffman, we've got movement, his handler said. Vaughn made an unscheduled visit to the clinic today. Something spooked him. Brian glanced at a surveillance photo of Scott Caldwell. What about our other subject? Caldwell's investigating something. Private meetings, unusual financial inquiries. These men were best friends for decades. What changed? That's what you need to find out. Your cover as the doctor's son gives you access. Use it. After ending the call, Brian studied the clinic's patient records he'd secretly accessed. Most were legitimate, but one stood out. Patient R.C., maintained in long-term care since 2002. Funded by anonymous donations through Monarch Medical. No medical necessity explained the induced coma. No family ever visited, yet the facility's most secure wing was dedicated to this mystery patient. Brian picked up another file, the dossier on Rebecca Caldwell, presumed dead for 23 years. The timing aligned perfectly with patient R.C. as admission. His father had always claimed the patient was a wealthy European heiress, whose family paid for discretion during her terminal illness. But the medications prescribed weren't for any terminal illness Brian recognized. They were for suppressing consciousness. Tomorrow he would find a way into that secured wing. Whatever secret his father and Curtis Vaughn were hiding, he suspected it centered around the woman in that room, and somehow connected to Scott Caldwell's renewed interest in the past. Scott's private jet touched down in Flagstaff under the cover of darkness. Reeves waited in a nondescript sedan, his face grim. You should have waited for me to complete the investigation, the PI said as Scott slid into the passenger seat. What did you find? Reeves handed him a folder. Monarch Medical is a shell company that funds a single patient at Northern Arizona Medical Research Center. The facility exists legitimately. Cutting-edge research, wealthy patients seeking discretion. But there's a secured wing that even most staff can't access. Scott flipped through surveillance photos of the facility. And the patient, female, admitted 23 years ago, listed in records only as RC. Reeves glanced at him. The dates align perfectly with your wife's disappearance. Scott's heart hammered against his ribs. Rebecca Cole. There's more. Reeves passed him another document. Preliminary DNA results. The sample from Chloe Martinez's coffee cup shows a 99.7% probability that she's your biological daughter. Scott closed his eyes. a wave of emotions crashing over him: vindication, rage, hope, and beneath it all, a burning question. If Chloe was his daughter, and Rebecca had been alive to give birth to her, was it possible she was still alive? "How do we get in?" he asked finally. "We don't. Not without raising alarms." Reeves pointed to a photo of a young man entering the facility. "But Dr. Hoffman's son might be our way." The son, Brian Hoffman, 32, supposedly works in the research department. But I did some digging. He's Interpol, working undercover. Been investigating financial irregularities at the clinic for months. Scott studied the photo. "Arrange a meeting." Tonight, Michelle Parker straightened. Patient RC's bedsheets, checking the monitors with practiced efficiency. 3 years as a nurse in the secured wing had taught her not to ask questions about the mysterious woman. The pay was exceptional, and discretion was part of the job. But lately, something had changed. The patient showed subtle signs of awareness. A finger twitch, tears, elevated brain activity when spoken to. Dr. Hoffman had increased her medication yesterday after Mr. Vaughn's visit, but Michelle had her doubts about the dosage. "Another quiet night for us, huh?" she said softly to the patient, a habit she'd developed during the lonely overnight shifts. "Your mysterious benefactor was here yesterday, not a friendly type." Michelle checked the IV drip, making a split-second decision that could cost her license. Or worse, she adjusted the flow rate slightly downward, reducing the sedative dosage. "Let's see if you're really in there," she whispered. Brian Hoffman recognized Scott Caldwell immediately when he entered the all-night diner. The billionaire sat alone in a corner booth, looking nothing like his polished public persona in simple jeans and a dark sweater. "Mr. Caldwell?" Brian slid into the seat across from him. "Your message said this concerns my father's clinic. It concerns a patient, RC." Scott watched the younger man carefully. "I believe she's my wife." Brian maintained a neutral expression. "That's quite a claim. Rebecca Caldwell died 23 years ago." "Did she?" Scott pushed a folder across the table. "Or did your father and Curtis Vaughn fake her death and keep her drugged in a private medical facility while stealing my newborn daughter?" The directness caught Brian off guard. As an Interpol agent, he'd learned to spot deception, and saw none in Caldwell's eyes, only raw determination. "I've suspected illegal activity at the clinic," Brian admitted cautiously. "But this goes beyond anything I imagined. I need to see her." Brian considered his options. His investigation had focused on money laundering, not kidnapping and false imprisonment. If Caldwell was right, this was far bigger than financial crimes. "Getting you in is impossible," he said finally. "But I can confirm whether the patient is your wife." "How?" Brian pulled out his phone, showing a secure medical database. "I'll need details only you would know. Distinguishing marks, old injuries, anything that could conclusively identify her." Scott leaned forward. Surgical scar on her right shoulder from a childhood accident. A small birthmark behind her left ear shaped like a crescent moon. And if it's really her, she'll be wearing half of a broken silver chain around her neck. Brian raised an eyebrow. "Half? The pendant is missing." Scott touched his own neck involuntarily. "A silver butterfly that our daughter now wears." Curtis paced his hotel suite. Phone pressed to his ear. "What do you mean he's not in New York?" His assistant's voice came through. "Mr. Caldwell's jet filed a flight plan to Flagstaff yesterday evening. He canceled all meetings for today." Curtis felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. 23 years of meticulous planning. Threatened by a chance encounter on a desert highway, he dialed Hoffman, who answered on the first ring. "We may have a problem. Scott's in Flagstaff." "Impossible," Hoffman replied. "We have security protocols. Check them anyway, and prepare for immediate transfer of the patient. The risk is less than the alternative," Curtis snapped. "If Scott finds her, we lose everything. I didn't spend 2 decades building this empire to watch it collapse now." After hanging up, Curtis opened his laptop to a secure server. The contingency plan had existed since the beginning. A private facility in a non-extradition country, documentation for new identities, liquid assets in untraceable accounts. He'd hoped never to use it, but he'd learned long ago that hope was for fools. Only meticulous planning ensured survival. Rebecca Cole Caldwell floated in darkness, for years. Or was it decades? Her consciousness had ebbed and flowed like a tide. never quite reaching the shore of full awareness. Fragments of memory drifted through the haze. Scott's smile on their wedding day, the joyous discovery of pregnancy, Curtis's unexpected declaration of love, rejected gently but firmly, then terror as the plane shuddered and dove toward the ocean. She remembered awaking in pain, surrounded by strangers. Curtis standing over her hospital bed, explaining that Scott had died in the crash, that he would take care of everything. Then the birth. Excruciating, confused, the drugs making everything blur, a baby's cry, a glimpse of her daughter before darkness claimed her again. Occasionally, she surfaced enough to hear snippets of conversation. Curtis and the doctor discussing her condition, a nurse's gentle voice reading news stories that made no sense, years passing while she slept. But tonight was different. The fog seemed thinner, her thoughts clearer. She could feel her body, leaden, weak, but present. She could hear the steady beep of monitors, feel the cool air on her skin. With monumental effort, Rebecca forced her eyes open. The room swam into blurry focus. Clinical, sterile, unfamiliar. A woman in scrubs stood nearby, her back turned. Rebecca tried to speak but produced only a raspy breath. The nurse turned, eyes widening in shock. "You're awake," she whispered. Rebecca managed to raise one trembling hand toward her throat, where the broken chain still lay. The nurse, her badge read Michelle, understood immediately. "Your necklace. The pendant is gone. It's been gone since you arrived." Rebecca's lips formed a word. "Scott." Michelle hesitated, then leaned closer. "Scott Caldwell, your husband. They told us you had no family." Tears slid down Rebecca's hollow cheeks as she formed her next words with painful effort. "He's alive." Brian Hoffman slipped through the clinic's side entrance using his access card. At 3 a.m., the facility operated with minimal staff, most concentrated in the main research wing. His phone vibrated with a text from Caldwell. "Standing by. Confirmation photo essential." Brian made his way to the secured wing, nodding to the night guard who recognized him as the director's son. The special access code his father thought he didn't know opened the final door. He found Michelle standing frozen beside patient RC's bed, her expression a mixture of shock and confusion. "Brian, I was just about to call for help. She's awake." He rushed to the bedside, stunned to see the patient's eyes open, alert with awareness despite decades of drug-induced unconsciousness. "Mrs. Caldwell," he whispered. Her eyes widened at the name, tears forming at the corners. "I need to document her condition," Brian said professionally, pulling out his phone. "For the medical record." Michelle nodded, helping position the patient while Brian took several clear photos of the conscious woman's face, including a close-up of the crescent-shaped birthmark behind her ear and the broken silver chain. "She asked about Scott Caldwell," Michelle said quietly. "She seems to think he's alive." Brian met Rebecca's desperate gaze. "He is alive, Mrs. Caldwell, and he's been looking for you." Scott stared at the phone in his hands, his world tilting on its axis. The photo showed a woman much changed by time and hardship. Gaunt cheeks, prematurely gray-streaked hair, eyes hollowed by years of unconsciousness. But unmistakably, Rebecca. "It's her," he whispered hoarsely. "My God, it's really her." Brian's voice came through the phone. "She's awake, but extremely weak. 23 years of induced coma has devastated her muscle tone. She can barely speak. I need to see her." "Not yet. Security would spot you instantly. We need to move carefully." Brian lowered his voice. "My father's implicated in this, along with Curtis Vaughn. They've been keeping her drugged for decades while laundering money through the clinic." Scott's grief gave way to cold rage. "Curtis was my best friend. He helped identify her remains after the crash. Then he's been deceiving you from the beginning. I need to report this to my Interpol handlers and secure proper medical care for Rebecca." A pause. "There's something else you should know. She's asking about a baby." Scott closed his eyes. "Our daughter, Chloe. The nurse, Michelle, is helping stabilize her. Once she's stronger, we can arrange a controlled extraction. But it will take time. Time is something I've lost too much of already," Scott said grimly. "She's been imprisoned for 23 years while I lived less than a mile from her jailer. If you confront Curtis now, you risk everything. He has contingency plans, probably including moving Rebecca if he suspects you know the truth." Scott reluctantly agreed to wait. After ending the call, he stared out the hotel window at the pre-dawn sky, thoughts racing. While one part of his family had been found, another complication loomed. Chloe, who still had no idea of her true parentage, was falling for his cousin. Curtis Vaughn's phone rang at 4:38 a.m., dragging him from a fitful sleep. "The patient is showing increased awareness, Doctor," Hoffman reported without preamble, panic evident in his voice. The nurse reported eye movement and attempts at speech during her rounds. Curtis sat bolt upright. "I told you to increase her medication." "We did, but her system seems to be developing resistance after all these years." "Then prepare for immediate transfer. Use the protocol we established." "That's not medically advisable in her condition." "Your medical advice stopped mattering the moment you accepted your first payment 23 years ago," Curtis snapped. "I'll be there in an hour. Have everything ready." Curtis dressed quickly, mind calculating contingencies. If Rebecca regained consciousness and communicated with anyone, the entire scheme would unravel. Scott would discover not just the deception about his wife, but the systematic embezzlement Curtis had orchestrated while rebuilding Caldwell Industries. It had begun as opportunity. With Scott devastated by grief, Curtis had stepped in to save the floundering company, siphoning millions through shell corporations while presenting himself as the loyal friend. But opportunity had become necessity when Rebecca unexpectedly survived the crash. Curtis had loved her since university, but she'd chosen Scott. The pregnancy had been the final straw. Scott Caldwell had everything Curtis believed should have been his. The plain sabotage was meant to eliminate Scott, leaving Rebecca for Curtis to comfort and eventually claim, along with control of Caldwell Industries. But the crash had injured Rebecca severely, leaving her with traumatic brain damage and memory loss. In her confused state, Curtis convinced her that Scott had died. Then came the unexpected complication. Her pregnancy had survived. After the birth, keeping Rebecca sedated became the only option to maintain the elaborate fiction he'd created. 23 years of meticulous planning. 23 years of building an empire from Scott's distracted grief. He wouldn't lose it all now. "You're awfully quiet," Logan observed as he drove Chloe back to Santa Rosa after their dinner date. "Didn't you like the restaurant?" Chloe gazed out the window at the starlit desert landscape. "The restaurant was beautiful, it's just, I feel like I'm living someone else's life when I'm with you." "What do you mean?" She touched her pendant absently. "You come from wealth and privilege. I'm just a waitress with no family history. Not even a birth certificate." Logan reached for her hand. "I don't care about any of that." "But I do." Chloe turned to face him. "I've spent my whole life wondering where I came from, who my parents were, why they gave me up. And lately it feels like there are, I don't know, shadows at the edge of my life, things that don't make sense." "Like what?" "Your cousin's reaction to my pendant, Betty's nervousness whenever I mention finding my birth parents, and now you, one of the country's most eligible bachelors, suddenly interested in me." Logan pulled the car over, turning to face her fully. "First, I'm interested in you because you're extraordinary. Kind, resilient, honest in a way that's rare in my world. Second, what exactly did Scott say about your pendant?" Chloe hesitated. "He asked if it opened." "How could he know that?" "No one can tell just by looking at it." Logan frowned. "That is strange. Listen, I'm heading to New York tomorrow for a meeting with Scott. Why don't you come with me? Maybe getting answers directly would help. I can't just leave Betty and my job. 2 days. We'll fly back Thursday." Logan smiled encouragingly. "Maybe it's time to start asking those questions that have followed you your whole life." Betty Richardson sat across from her visitor, hands trembling around her teacup. The elegant woman who'd arrived in response to her call was exactly as she remembered from decades ago. Poised, authoritative, and quietly dangerous. "Thank you for coming, Victoria," Betty said softly. Victoria Markham, former head of domestic staff for the Caldwell estate, nodded. At 75, she remained formidable, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun. 23 years without a word, Elizabeth, this must be serious. "Scott Caldwell has found Chloe." Victoria's composed facade cracked slightly. "How?" "Chance. His car broke down near her workplace." Betty pushed the newspaper clipping across the table. The wedding photo showing Rebecca with the butterfly pendant. "He recognized the necklace. Victoria picked up the clipping, memories flooding back. We agreed this was safer for the child. Was it? Or did we just convince ourselves of that? Betty's voice sharpened. She deserved to know her heritage. Her heritage nearly got her killed before she was born. Victoria set down the clipping. Curtis Vaughn destroyed that plane to eliminate Scott. If he'd known Rebecca survived and gave birth. But Scott survived too. All these years, we've kept a daughter from her living father. Victoria studied her old colleague. There's more, isn't there? Betty nodded grimly. His cousin, Logan Caldwell, is romantically pursuing Chloe. The family is circling her whether we intervened or not. Does she suspect anything? She's always questioned her origins. The pendant meant something to her, even as a child. Betty met Victoria's gaze. It's time for truth, Victoria, before someone else tells her a version we can't control. Brian Hoffman helped Rebecca take small sips of water, her trembling hands barely able to hold the cup. Michelle monitored her vitals, amazed at the patient's rapid improvement once the sedatives began clearing her system. Scott, Rebecca whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. Need to tell him. We're working on it, Brian assured her. But we need to be careful. The men who did this to you are powerful. Rebecca's eyes, though clouded with years of drugged sleep, sparked with sudden clarity. Curtis. He sabotaged the plane, wanted Scott. Dead. Brian exchanged alarmed glances with Michelle. You remember the crash? Rebecca nodded weakly. Told me. Scott died. I was pregnant after baby came. Kept me asleep. Tears leaked from her eyes. My baby. Where? Your daughter is alive, Brian said gently. Her name is Chloe. She has your pendant. A look of profound relief washed over Rebecca's face. Then her expression hardened with determination. Curtis will come for me when he knows. I'm awake. As if summoned by her words, an alert sounded on Brian's phone. A security breach notification from the system he'd hacked into. He checked the cameras and saw his father entering the building, accompanied by Curtis Vaughn. They're here, he said urgently. We need to move you. Rebecca clutched his arm with surprising strength. No, not strong enough. Yet. Her eyes bored into his. Tell Scott, microchip, in pendant, evidence, everything. Microchip, what evidence? But footsteps in the hallway cut their conversation short. Michelle quickly restored Rebecca's IV line with saline instead of sedatives. Arranging her to appear unconscious, Brian slipped into an adjacent supply closet just as the door opened. Curtis Vaughn entered, followed by Dr. Hoffman, both unaware that their secret patient was now fully conscious and remembered everything. Curtis stood over Rebecca's bed, studying her seemingly unconscious form. Her face appeared peaceful, showing no signs of the awareness Brian and Michelle had witnessed minutes earlier. Increase the sedation for transport, Curtis instructed Dr. Hoffman. The plane leaves at noon. The risks of moving her are less than the risks of keeping her here. Curtis checked her vital signs on the monitor. Scott Caldwell is in Flagstaff. It's only a matter of time before he connects the dots. From the supply closet, Brian recorded the conversation on his phone, careful not to make a sound. Rebecca lay perfectly still, her years of forced unconsciousness making her an expert at feigning sleep. The overseas facility is prepared, Curtis continued. Once she's there, your obligation is complete. And my payment. The final transfer will be made once she's secured. I suggest you plan your own departure carefully. If Scott discovers your involvement, neither your medical license nor your freedom will survive. Dr. Hoffman nodded grimly. What about the nurse? Michelle Parker has been handling most of her care. She knows nothing of significance. Pay her a generous severance and send her away. Curtis's voice hardened. If she resists, remind her of the confidentiality agreement she signed. Breaking it would result in both legal and personal consequences, Michelle. Maintaining her professional composure while checking Rebecca's IV felt a chill run down her spine at the thinly veiled threat. I'll prepare the transfer documents, Dr. Hoffman said, moving toward the door. We'll need an ambulance with full life support capabilities. Once they left, Brian emerged from hiding, exchanging alarmed glances with Michelle. We need to move up our timeline, he whispered. They're planning to transfer her at noon. Rebecca's eyes fluttered open. Scott, she rasped. Need Scott. Brian nodded. I'll call him now, Michelle. Can you prepare her for movement? We'll need to get her out before they return. Michelle hesitated. Moving her in this condition is better than letting them take her to some untraceable facility overseas. Brian squeezed Rebecca's hand reassuringly. Hold on, Mrs. Caldwell. You've survived 23 years of this nightmare, just a little longer. Scott paced his hotel room, phone pressed to his ear. What do you mean they're moving her today? Curtis and my father are preparing for transport, Brian replied urgently. Private medical flight to an overseas facility. We need to get her out now. How? The facility has security. I have a plan, but I need your help, and we need to move fast. 15 minutes later, an ambulance with Interpol agents disguised as medical personnel approached the clinic's service entrance. Scott, wearing a doctor's lab coat and surgical mask, waited in the back. His phone buzzed with a text from Reeves. CV still inside. Security distracted at main entrance. Everything hinged on perfect timing, and on Rebecca's ability to endure the move in her fragile condition. In New York, Logan showed Chloe into his penthouse apartment with its spectacular view of Central Park. You can stay here while I meet with Scott, he said, setting down her small overnight bag. Make yourself at home. Chloe wandered to the floor-to-ceiling windows, feeling increasingly out of place. This is all so surreal. Logan touched her shoulder gently. Hey, you belong anywhere you want to be. Don't let anyone tell you different. She turned to face him. Why are you doing all this? Being so kind to me? Because from the moment I saw you at that diner, I felt like I'd found something I didn't even know I was looking for. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Call it connection, chemistry, whatever you want. It's real. Chloe wanted to believe him, but doubts lingered. And it has nothing to do with this. She held up the butterfly pendant. Logan frowned. Why would your necklace matter to me? I don't know, but it mattered to your cousin, and now I'm in New York in your penthouse. About to meet one of the richest men in America, who just happens to have recognized my only connection to my past. She stepped back. It feels like I'm missing something important. Logan considered her words carefully. You're right that Scott's reaction was strange. That's why I thought bringing you here might help get answers. He checked his watch. I've been trying to reach him since we landed, but he's not answering. Let me try his office. While Logan made the call, Chloe explored the apartment, stopping at a collection of family photos. One caught her eye. An older wedding photo of a handsome young man with a beautiful dark-haired woman. The bride wore a silver butterfly pendant identical to hers. Her heart began to race. She was still staring at the photo when Logan returned, his expression confused. Scott's executive assistant says he's taking personal time in Arizona. Logan noticed the photo in her hands. That's Scott and Rebecca on their wedding day. My cousin was never the same after she died. Chloe could barely breathe. This pendant, it's exactly like mine. Logan took the frame, examining it more closely. You're right. I never noticed before. He looked up at her, realization dawning. Chloe, when were you born? November 2002. But the sisters at the orphanage estimated I was about 6 months old when I was left there. Logan quickly calculated the dates. Rebecca's plane crashed in May 2002. He stared at Chloe with new eyes. You don't think... I need to see Scott Caldwell, Chloe said firmly. Now. Betty opened her front door to find 2 men in expensive suits waiting. Her blood ran cold when she recognized Curtis Vaughn from newspaper photos. Mrs. Richardson. The younger man smiled professionally. I'm David Mercer, Mr. Vaughn's attorney. We'd like to speak with you about Chloe Martinez. Betty gripped the doorframe. She's not here. We know. She's in New York with Logan Caldwell. Curtis stepped forward. May we come in? This concerns Chloe's future. Reluctantly, Betty let them enter, wishing she'd accepted Victoria's offer to stay. Something about Curtis's smile reminded her of a predator assessing prey. What about Chloe's future? She asked cautiously. Curtis sat without being invited. The Caldwell Foundation offers scholarships to exceptional young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Chloe has been nominated. By whom? Scott Caldwell himself. Curtis's smile never reached his eyes. A full ride to any university, plus living expenses and a job at Caldwell Industries afterward. Quite the opportunity. Betty wasn't fooled. After 23 years, the Caldwells suddenly develop an interest in an orphaned waitress. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. But Curtis maintained his composure. Mr. Caldwell was impressed by her assistance when his car broke down. She mentioned her background, and he saw potential worth nurturing. How generous, Betty replied dryly. And what does this have to do with you, Mr. Vaughn? You're not a Caldwell. I'm Scott's closest advisor and friend. I handle sensitive matters for him. Curtis leaned forward, including verifying the backgrounds of scholarship recipients. We need to confirm Chloe's history, the orphanage records, any information about her birth parents. Betty's suspicions crystallized. Curtis Vaughn wasn't offering Chloe an opportunity. He was fishing for information about how much she knew of her origins. I'm afraid I can't help you, she said, standing. Chloe knows nothing about her birth parents. The nuns at New Hope said she was left with just a silver pendant and no information. Curtis's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of the pendant. A pendant? How interesting. May I ask what it looked like? A simple silver cross, Betty lied smoothly. Nothing valuable, just sentimental to Chloe. After they left, Betty called Victoria immediately. Curtis Vaughn was just here, asking about Chloe and specifically about her pendant. Victoria's response was immediate. Pack a bag. Don't stay there tonight, he knows. At an airstrip outside Flagstaff, Scott cradled Rebecca's frail body in the back of a private medical transport plane. After 23 years apart, holding her again felt like a miracle and a tragedy. Her once vibrant form was now skeletal, her luminous beauty dimmed by years of enforced sleep. I'm here, he whispered as the medical team prepared for takeoff. I found you, Rebecca. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with effort. A trembling hand reached up to touch his cheek. Scott, she whispered, you're really alive? Yes, my love, and so are you. Tears streamed down his face. I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner. Chloe, she managed. Our daughter. She's beautiful, Rebecca. Strong and kind and brave, just like her mother. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Pendant, microchip, evidence. Before Scott could ask what she meant, Brian rushed into the plane. We need to take off now. Security at the clinic just discovered she's missing. Curtis has been alerted. As the engines roared to life, Scott held Rebecca's hand tightly, vowing silently that Curtis Vaughn would pay for every moment of the 23 years he had stolen from them. But first, he needed to get to New York, and to Chloe, who still had no idea that she was about to meet not just one, but both of her parents. Scott's private medical jet touched down at Teterboro Airport outside New York City. Just after midnight, a discreet ambulance waited on the tarmac to transport Rebecca to a secure private medical facility Scott had arranged through Brian's Interpol connections. She's stabilizing, the medical team leader informed Scott as they carefully transferred Rebecca to the ambulance. The drugs are clearing her system, but recovery from such prolonged sedation will be a long process. Scott squeezed Rebecca's hand. I need to find our daughter. Will you be okay? Rebecca's eyes, more alert now that the sedatives were wearing off, focused on his face. Go, she whispered. Find Chloe. Bring her. To me. I promise. Scott kissed her forehead. Brian will stay with you, and there will be security at all times. As the ambulance departed, Scott checked his phone to find multiple missed calls from Logan and a text. Need to talk ASAP about Chloe and Rebecca's pendant. His heart raced. Had Logan figured it out? Was Chloe with him? Mr. Caldwell. Reeves approached, phone in hand. Curtis Vaughn boarded a private jet in Flagstaff 3 hours ago. He's likely already in New York. Scott's expression hardened. Then we're in a race, and I don't intend to lose. In Logan's penthouse. Chloe sat surrounded by printouts of old news articles about the Caldwell plane crash, Rebecca's presumed death, and Scott and Curtis's business partnership. It's impossible, she whispered, touching the butterfly pendant at her throat. I can't be. The timing fits, Logan said gently. Rebecca's plane crashed in May 2002. You were left at the orphanage in November, approximately 6 months old according to their records. Chloe shook her head, overwhelmed. But the crash? They said no one survived. Officially. But what if Rebecca did survive somehow? What if she was pregnant when the plane went down? Logan knelt beside her chair. Chloe, your pendant is identical to Rebecca's wedding gift from Scott. I've never seen another like it. Why wouldn't Scott have looked for his wife and child? Why would he believe they were dead if they weren't? I don't know. But he's in Arizona right now, and his assistant wouldn't tell me why. Logan checked his phone again. He's still not answering. Chloe stared at the wedding photo, at the woman wearing her pendant. If this were true, her entire identity was built on a lie. And if Rebecca Caldwell had survived long enough to give birth, what had happened to her afterward? "I need to call Betty," she said suddenly. She might know something. When Betty didn't answer, Chloe's anxiety spiked. She always answers. Always. "Try again in the morning," Logan suggested. It's late, but Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She'd spent her life wondering about her origins, and now that answers seemed within reach. New questions multiplied. The penthouse intercom buzzed, startling them both. "Mr. Caldwell is here to see you, sir," the doorman announced. Logan and Chloe exchanged looks. "Scott?" Logan asked. "No, sir, Mr. Curtis Vaughn." Scott pulled up outside his cousin's building, checking his watch, nearly 2 a.m. He'd tried calling multiple times, but Logan wasn't answering now. "Wait here," he instructed his driver, scanning the building's entrance. He froze when he saw a familiar figure entering. Curtis Vaughn. Scott rushed from the car, making it to the lobby just as the elevator doors closed on Curtis's face. A quick glance at the indicator showed it heading to the penthouse. Logan's floor. "Mr. Caldwell." The doorman recognized him. "Your cousin is expecting you." "Who just went up?" Scott demanded. "Mr. Vaughn, sir. He said it was urgent business." Scott jabbed the elevator call button repeatedly. If Curtis had discovered Chloe was with Logan, she could be in danger. The man had maintained an elaborate deception for 23 years, imprisoned Rebecca, and separated them from their child. There was no telling what he might do, now that his scheme was unraveling. "Curtis." Logan opened the door, surprised. "It's the middle of the night." Curtis Vaughn entered smoothly, his practiced smile faltering slightly when he spotted Chloe sitting amid the newspaper clippings about Rebecca's crash. "I apologize for the late hour," he said, quickly regaining his composure. "But I've just learned some disturbing news that couldn't wait." Chloe stood, instinctively moving closer to Logan. Something about Curtis's presence made her uneasy. "What news?" Logan asked, positioning himself slightly in front of Chloe. Curtis's eyes fixed on the pendant at Chloe's throat. "I see you've been researching family history," he observed, nodding toward the scattered articles. "That's actually why I'm here. You know something about this," Chloe said, her hand covering the pendant protectively. "Indeed I do, my dear." Curtis's voice softened. "I know exactly who you are, and I'm afraid you're being manipulated by people with dangerous delusions." Logan's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about, Curtis?" "Scott Caldwell has become obsessed with the idea that his dead wife somehow survived and had a child?" Curtis sighed dramatically. "It's a psychotic break, I'm afraid. The stress of the Hamilton deal falling through, combined with the approaching anniversary of Rebecca's death, it was too much. That doesn't explain this." Chloe held up the pendant. "A cruel coincidence that Scott has twisted into fantasy." Curtis extended his hand. "May I?" Chloe hesitated, then removed the necklace, keeping the chain firmly in her grasp as she let Curtis examine the butterfly. "Remarkable similarity," he admitted. "But Rebecca's pendant was recovered from the crash site. It's in Scott's personal safe." Logan frowned. "That's not what Scott told me. He said it was never found." A flash of irritation crossed Curtis's face before his mask of concern returned. "That's exactly my point. His memories are becoming distorted. He's creating connections that don't exist." "Then why is he in Arizona?" Logan challenged. "Chasing shadows." He hired a private investigator to follow Chloe, convinced she's his long-lost daughter. Curtis turned to Chloe. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but Scott's mental health has been fragile for years. This fixation on you could become dangerous." Chloe's mind raced. If Curtis was telling the truth, she was the target of a grieving man's delusion. But if he was lying, "Where's Betty?" she demanded suddenly. "I can't reach her. Your guardian, I'm sure she's fine." Curtis checked his watch. "I've arranged a safe place for you until this situation resolves. A car is waiting downstairs." Logan stepped forward. "She's staying here, Curtis." "I'm afraid I must insist." Curtis's genial manner hardened. "This is for her protection." "From whom?" a new voice demanded. They turned to find Scott Caldwell standing in the doorway, eyes fixed on Curtis with cold fury. "Scott," Curtis recovered quickly. "I was just explaining your recent confusion to Logan and Mrs. Martinez. The only confusion is why you're not already in handcuffs," Scott replied, entering the room. "For kidnapping, false imprisonment, attempted murder, and embezzlement, just for starters." Curtis's hand moved toward his jacket, but Scott was faster. "I wouldn't. Brian Hoffman and Interpol agents are on their way up right now." Chloe looked between the two men, the tension crackling like electricity. "Will someone please tell me what's going on?" Scott finally turned to face her, his expression softening. "Chloe, that pendant you're holding belongs to your mother, Rebecca Caldwell. It was a wedding gift from me, with our initials engraved inside." "Rebecca died in the crash," Curtis interjected smoothly. "Scott, these delusions have gone too far." "Rebecca survived," Scott countered. "She was pregnant with our daughter when the plane went down. A daughter born 5 months later in a private clinic in Arizona. A daughter Curtis made sure was separated from both her parents." Chloe felt lightheaded. "My mother is alive. She is." Scott's voice broke with emotion. "I found her yesterday, held captive in a medical facility for 23 years, kept unconscious by Curtis and his accomplices." "That's preposterous," Curtis exclaimed. "Logan, can't you see he's completely lost touch with reality?" But Logan was studying Scott's face intently. "Where is Rebecca now?" "Under medical care in Manhattan, recovering from decades of forced sedation." Scott stepped closer to Chloe. "She asked for you. She never forgot you. Not for a single day." Chloe's legs buckled, and Logan caught her arm to steady her. "If this is true, why would anyone do this? Money? Power? Obsession?" Scott's gaze returned to Curtis. "He wanted everything that was mine. My company, my wife, my life. When he couldn't have Rebecca willingly, he tried to eliminate me. But we both survived the crash." Curtis's composed facade began to crack. "You have no proof of any of this." "Actually, we do," said Brian Hoffman, entering with 2 Interpol agents. "My father has provided a full confession regarding his role in keeping Rebecca Caldwell sedated under your instructions." As the agents moved toward Curtis, he lunged suddenly toward Chloe, grabbing her arm. "That pendant contains a microchip with evidence that could destroy everything. I protected you for 23 years, you owe me." Logan pulled Chloe away from Curtis's grasp as the agents restrained him. "You'll have plenty of time to explain your version in court," one said, handcuffing him as Curtis was led away. Chloe turned to Scott, trembling. "Is it really true? My mother is alive. You're my father." Scott nodded, tears in his eyes. "DNA tests confirmed it. You're our daughter, Chloe. And if you're willing, there's someone who's waited 23 years to meet you." The private medical facility occupied the entire top floor of a discreet building on the Upper East Side as the elevator doors opened. Chloe hesitated, her heart hammering against her ribs. "She may look fragile," Scott said gently, "but she's stronger than anyone I've ever known. Just like you." Chloe nodded, unable to speak. The pendant felt heavy around her neck, a weight of history and connection she was only beginning to understand. "Ready?" Scott asked. No, she wasn't ready. How could anyone be ready to meet a mother they'd believed dead, or more accurately, had never known existed? But Chloe stepped forward anyway. The room was softly lit, medical equipment humming quietly. In the bed lay a woman whose face Chloe had seen only in decades-old photographs. Despite the hollowed cheeks and premature gray streaking her dark hair, Rebecca Caldwell's eyes were alert and luminous. The same shape and color as Chloe's own. Those eyes widened at the sight of her, filling instantly with tears. "Chloe," Rebecca whispered, extending a trembling hand. The sound of her name in her mother's voice broke something open inside Chloe. She moved forward as if in a dream, taking the offered hand. "You have my eyes," Rebecca said softly, and Scott's smile. Chloe couldn't hold back her tears. "I've spent my whole life wondering where I came from, who I belonged to." "You belonged with us." Rebecca's voice strengthened with emotion. "Every day without you was agony, even in my drugged state. I dreamed of you growing up, reaching for you but never finding you." Scott stood back, watching mother and daughter reconnect across the impossible void of 23 stolen years. When Rebecca gestured for him to join them, he sat on the edge of the bed, completing their broken circle. "The pendant," Rebecca said, her fingers reaching for the butterfly at Chloe's throat. "You kept it safe all these years." Chloe removed the necklace, placing it in her mother's palm. "It was my only connection to you, to my past." Rebecca turned the butterfly over with practiced fingers, pressing hidden spots that caused it to spring open, revealing a tiny compartment. "The microchip," she whispered. "It's still here." "What microchip?" Scott asked. "You mentioned it before, but—" "Insurance," Rebecca explained, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Before the crash, I discovered financial irregularities at Caldwell Industries. Curtis was embezzling funds, establishing offshore accounts. I confronted him privately, thinking he would make it right." Her expression darkened. "Instead, he declared his love for me, said we could run away together." Scott's jaw tightened. "And when you refused, he became threatening, said accidents happen to people who expose secrets." Rebecca's hands trembled. "I didn't tell you because I wanted proof first. I had an IT specialist friend create this microchip with all the evidence. Account numbers, transactions, everything. That's why Curtis sabotaged the plane," Scott realized. "Not just obsession with you, but self-preservation." Rebecca nodded. "I kept the chip in my pendant for safekeeping, planning to show you after our trip. Then the crash happened." She looked at Chloe. "When I realized I was in labor months later, I begged the nurse to ensure my baby kept the pendant. It was the only way I could protect you both. The evidence that might someday expose the truth." Chloe felt the weight of her mother's sacrifice. "You saved the evidence, knowing what it might cost you." "I saved the most precious part of us," Rebecca corrected, squeezing Chloe's hand. "And now you've brought all of us back together." "Curtis Vaughn was arrested last night," announced the news anchor on the television in Betty's hotel room. "The longtime business partner of Scott Caldwell has been charged with multiple felonies, including embezzlement, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Sources close to the investigation suggest this may be one of the most elaborate criminal conspiracies in corporate history." Betty exhaled in relief, turning to Victoria, who sat beside her. "It's over." Victoria shook her head. "It's only beginning. Chloe will have questions for us. Why we didn't tell her the truth. We did what we thought was right," Betty insisted. "Curtis would have eliminated anyone who threatened his secret. We protected her the only way we could, by denying her her heritage. Her family." Victoria's gaze was penetrating. "We made a choice, Elizabeth. We must face the consequences of that choice." Betty's phone rang. "Chloe?" she answered with trepidation. "Chloe, are you all right?" "Better than all right," came the reply, Chloe's voice filled with emotion. "I found them. Betty. My parents. Both of them." Betty closed her eyes, tears flowing freely. "I'm so glad, sweetheart. So very glad." "Did you know?" Chloe asked directly. "About who I really was?" Betty hesitated, then answered truthfully. "I recognized the pendant when you were brought to the orphanage. I'd worked for the Caldwells years earlier. But Curtis Vaughn was powerful and dangerous, I thought. I believed I was protecting you." "You did protect me," Chloe said softly. "You gave me a home, love, stability. But I need the whole truth now, Betty, all of it. And you shall have it," Betty promised. Every detail. 1 week later, the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria glittered with New York's elite. Gathered for the Caldwell Foundation's annual charity gala, rumors had circulated for days about Scott Caldwell's mysterious absence and Curtis Vaughn's arrest, creating an atmosphere of tense anticipation. Logan adjusted his bow tie, scanning the crowd. "Are you sure about this?" he asked Scott, who stood slightly apart from the gathering. "It's not too late to cancel," Rebecca insisted. Scott replied. 23 years of her life were stolen. She wants to reclaim it on her own terms. Across the room, Curtis's attorney David Mercer worked the crowd, spin-doctoring his client's situation. "A terrible misunderstanding," he assured influential guests. "Mr. Vaughn will be fully exonerated once all facts come to light." The orchestra finished their piece, and the master of ceremonies approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our host, Mr. Scott Caldwell, who has a special announcement." The crowd applauded as Scott took the stage, his expression solemn yet purposeful. "For 23 years, he began, I've led this foundation in memory of my wife, Rebecca, who I believed perished in a tragic accident." He paused, surveying the attentive faces. That belief was a carefully orchestrated lie. A murmur rippled through the audience. My wife did not die in that crash. She was imprisoned, kept unconscious for over 2 decades by the man many of you know as my closest friend and business partner, Curtis Vaughn. The murmur became a shocked buzz of conversation. Scott raised his hand for silence. Tonight, I'm not here to elaborate on Curtis's crimes. The courts will handle that. I'm here to correct a historical wrong, to reclaim what was stolen from my family. His voice strengthened. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you my wife, Rebecca Caldwell. The crowd gasped collectively as Rebecca appeared at the entrance to the ballroom. Though thin and using a wheelchair for support, she radiated a quiet dignity. At her side stood Chloe, one hand protectively on the wheelchair's handle. As mother and daughter made their way slowly through the parting crowd, the room fell into stunned silence. Rebecca's gaze remained fixed ahead, ignoring the whispers and stares when they reached the stage. Scott extended his hand to help Rebecca stand, with visible effort but remarkable determination. She rose from the wheelchair, took the microphone, and faced the audience. Many of you attended my funeral, she began, her voice quiet but steady. Some of you were genuinely grieving. Others were complicit in the lie. Her gaze swept the room, lingering on several uncomfortable faces. For 23 years, I was kept drugged and imprisoned while Curtis Vaughn stole my life, separated me from my husband, and removed my newborn daughter from my arms. She gestured to Chloe, who stepped forward. This is our daughter, Chloe Caldwell Cole. Born 5 months after the crash that was meant to kill her father, tonight, we reclaim our family name and our rightful place in each other's lives. Across the room, Mercer discreetly headed for the exit, phone pressed to his ear, but found his path blocked by Brian Hoffman and 2 Interpol agents. David Mercer, Brian announced. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, accessory after the fact, and obstruction of justice. As Mercer was escorted out, Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Curtis Vaughn believed he could erase me from existence, but love leaves traces that no amount of deception can eradicate. The butterfly always completes its metamorphosis, no matter how long it takes. She reached for the silver butterfly pendant, now restored to its rightful place around her neck, its chain mended and whole once more. Tonight marks not just my return, but the rebirth of the Caldwell family, and a promise that justice, though delayed, will not be denied. 3 months passed like a whirlwind. Spring bloomed across New Mexico as a small chapel outside Santa Rosa prepared for a unique celebration. Wildflowers decorated the simple altar, and sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. Betty Richardson sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Victoria Markham beside her, both women now reconciled with their past choices through long conversations with the family they had tried to protect in their own imperfect way. Never imagined I'd live to see this day, Betty whispered. Victoria squeezed her hand. You did right by her, Elizabeth. Despite everything, the chapel doors opened, revealing Scott in an elegant suit, looking younger than he had in decades. The weight of loss and betrayal finally lifted from his shoulders. At his side stood Rebecca, still thin but steadily regaining her strength, her dark hair now stylishly cut to incorporate the silver streaks earned through her ordeal. Behind them, Michelle Parker, the nurse whose compassion had helped awaken Rebecca, entered on Logan's arm. The unlikely couple had formed a connection during the tumultuous aftermath of Curtis's arrest. Her straightforward kindness a balm to Logan's cynicism about his privileged world. Ready? Scott whispered to Rebecca as they took their places before the small gathering of close friends and family. She smiled, strength returning to her face more each day. I've been ready for 23 years. The simple country pastor welcomed everyone, his voice warm with sincerity. We gather today for a most unusual and blessed celebration. 3 ceremonies in one, each representing healing, new beginnings, and the triumph of love over unimaginable obstacles. As the pastor spoke, Brian Hoffman slipped quietly into the back of the chapel. He caught Chloe's eye from where she waited in the small anteroom, giving her a reassuring nod. First, the pastor continued, we celebrate the marriage of Logan Caldwell and Michelle Parker, 2 souls who found each other amidst extraordinary circumstances. Logan and Michelle exchanged simple vows and rings, their unlikely romance a beautiful byproduct of the family's reunion. When they sealed their union with a kiss, spontaneous applause filled the chapel. "Second," the pastor said, turning to Scott and Rebecca, "we witness the renewal of vows between Scott and Rebecca Caldwell, whose bond survived decades of forced separation through a love that never dimmed." Scott took Rebecca's hands in his. 23 years ago, I promised to love you until death parted us. Not even the false belief in your death could stop me from loving you every single day we were apart." Rebecca's voice strengthened as she spoke. "In darkness and silence, your love was the thread I clung to. Today I promise again, with even deeper understanding of what, for better or worse, truly means." They exchanged new rings, the originals lost to time and deception. As they embraced, there wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. And finally, the pastor announced, "We conduct a symbolic baptism and naming ceremony, officially welcoming Chloe Martinez into her birthright as Chloe Caldwell Cole." Chloe emerged from the anteroom in a simple white dress, the butterfly pendant gleaming at her throat. As she approached her parents, the physical resemblance was striking. Rebecca's eyes, Scott's smile, a perfect blend of them both. The ceremony was brief but profound, water symbolizing cleansing of the past deceptions, and oil representing the anointing of her true identity. When the pastor pronounced her Chloe Caldwell Cole, she embraced her parents, completing the circle broken for so many years. Outside the chapel afterward, beneath a sprawling old oak tree, the small gathering celebrated with champagne and a simple meal prepared by the local community who had embraced their story. "To new beginnings," Logan toasted, his arm around Michelle's waist. "And to those who helped us find our way back to each other," Scott added. Nodding toward Betty and Victoria, Brian and Michelle, Rebecca, stronger each day but still using a cane for support, found a quiet moment alone with Chloe on a stone bench beneath the oak's sprawling branches. "So much has changed so quickly," Chloe said, still adjusting to her new reality. "From orphaned waitress to heiress of the Caldwell fortune in mere months." "Too much?" Rebecca asked gently. Chloe considered the question. "Sometimes it feels overwhelming. New family, new name, new possibilities I never imagined. Yet you seem to be handling it with remarkable grace." "I had a good foundation." Chloe smiled toward Betty, who was deep in conversation with Scott. "She may have kept secrets, but she gave me everything she could." Rebecca squeezed her daughter's hand. "I've thought often about what I would have wanted for you during those years. A loving home, moral guidance, the chance to develop your own strength. Betty gave you all of that. What happens now?" Chloe asked, the enormity of her changed circumstances still sinking in. "Whatever you want," Rebecca answered simply. "Your father has restructured the company, using the evidence from the microchip to recover the stolen funds. The foundation is being redirected to focus on helping orphaned children and victims of injustice. And Curtis." Rebecca's expression grew solemn. "Facing multiple federal charges, his trial begins next month, though his lawyers are still fighting to suppress the microchip evidence." Brian approached, his formal Interpol duties concluded, but his personal investment in the family obvious in his expression. "May I join you?" Rebecca nodded warmly, making room on the bench. The connection between Brian and Chloe had grown steadily over the past months, built on shared experiences and mutual respect. "I've been reassigned," he informed them. "The task force investigating the cartel connections has been expanded. Apparently, Curtis's operation was just one branch of a much larger network." "Will you be leaving?" Chloe asked, her concern evident. "Temporarily, the investigation will take me to Switzerland and possibly South America." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet box. "But I wanted to ask something before I go." Chloe's eyes widened as he opened the box, revealing not a ring but a pair of plane tickets. "Paris," he explained. "When I return in 3 months, no pressure, no expectations, just an invitation to explore possibilities together if you're interested." Rebecca discreetly excused herself, giving them privacy. She made her way to Scott, who stood watching the sunset paint the desert mountains gold. "Our daughter seems to have found someone worthy of her," she observed, following his gaze to where Chloe and Brian sat in deep conversation. "He's a good man," Scott agreed. "Honorable. not unlike his father before Curtis corrupted him. Speaking of Dr. Hoffman, has he agreed to testify? Scott nodded. Full immunity in exchange for complete cooperation. His testimony about maintaining your induced coma under Curtis's orders will be devastating. Rebecca leaned against her husband, drawing strength from his solid presence. 23 years, she mused. So much lost time, but not lost love, Scott countered, wrapping his arm around her waist. And not a lost daughter. We found our way back to each other against impossible odds. As the celebration continued around them, Scott produced a small gift box. I had this made for you. Rebecca opened it to find a new silver butterfly pendant, larger and more intricate than her original. Open it, Scott encouraged. Inside were 3 miniature photographs, Rebecca and Scott on their wedding day, baby Chloe from her orphanage records, and a recent photo of the 3 of them together. Past, interrupted present, and reclaimed future all preserved within the butterfly's wings. Butterflies always complete their metamorphosis, Scott said softly, echoing the words Rebecca had used at the gala, no matter how long it takes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Chloe joined her parents, the 3 Caldwells standing together as a family at last. Above them, a blue butterfly fluttered against the darkening sky, riding currents of air that would carry it home. Scott embraced the 2 women of his life, finally understanding that the true engine of existence never fails when fueled by unconditional love. And Chloe, touching her original pendant while looking toward the future, understood that her journey of discovery had only just begun.